So what we're going to do now is create a date input reusable component that we can use inside our activity form. And what we'll do, we'll start this off just like any other input. We'll go across to our form folder inside our common folder, and we'll create a new file, and we'll just call this one dateinput.tsx. And just like any other component we're creating, we'll use the RAFC snippets to do this as well. Now, just like any other form component that we're using, we're going to start it off in pretty much the same way. So I'm just going to open up the text input, and I'm just going to copy across a whole bunch of stuff from here to be as lazy as possible whilst creating this component. So we need all of this, and I'll just paste this into my date input, and we'll make a few changes here. It's not going to be a string in this case, it's actually going to be a date, because React Widgets works with JavaScript date objects as opposed to the strings that we were using inside our HTML date input widget that only ever seems to work on Chrome. And it's still going to be an HTML input element as well. And we'll just make this a react.fc and pass in iprops. And we'll just also get our destructured properties from our text input as well, and we'll copy these and paste them inside. And what we'll also do is just grab the form field as well and copy this and just paste this inside our date input as well. Now we don't need the type, so I'm going to ditch this and also remove it from the properties in here. And what we need instead is the date and time picker component from React Widgets. So let's attempt to add this, and we'll say datetime_picker, and this isn't coming in automatically. And this is normally a hint that the package that we've installed hasn't got some type definitions that come along with it. So let's take a look, and if I import datetime_picker, which is exported as a named export from React Widgets, and we'll say React and React Widgets, then whilst in this particular case it doesn't actually give us a red underline, you can see some ellipses here which tell us that it could not find a declaration file for the module React Widgets. And what we want to do, and I know these exist, is we want to also install the types for React Widgets as well. So I'm just going to copy this line into my clipboard and open up the terminal. And we want to make sure we're inside the context of our client app to do this. And I'm just going to paste in the npm install at types/React Widgets and press return. And this installs successfully. So let's go back, and what we want to do is we want to add the properties that our datetime_picker needs. And we'll add the placeholder, and we'll set this equal to the placeholder. And what we also want to do is get our value out of our input in this case. And we'll specify value, and we'll say input.value. And what we want to do is, because this is obviously going to be used if we're editing a date as well as when we're creating a new activity and we've got an empty date, we just want to hover our mouse over the value property in this case, and this tells us that this should be the currently selected date, and this should be a date instance, which is a JavaScript date, or it should be null. Now in the case that we're editing an activity, then we're going to have something inside this value, but we also want to accommodate when we're creating an activity, so we'll give it an alternative of null if we don't have anything inside this input.value. We also need to give our datetime_picker an onChange event, and what we'll do for this is we'll say onChange, and we'll just set this to the input.onChange event that we get back from, or we're passing in from React final form. And what we also want to do is just accommodate the rest of the properties that are available inside our datetime_picker, and we're just going to spread those across inside this component as well. So I'll just add another property. And what we can do in this case is just specify rest, and this is going to give us access to the rest of the properties inside the datetime_picker. And what we'll do is we'll just spread those across into the datetime picker props as well. So we still need to keep the validation information. We'll still be using the same concepts of validation in our date input as well. And with this in place, what we can do is we can go back to our activity form. So let's just open this. And what we'll do is we'll swap our text input in our date, and we'll pass in our date input in this case. And once again, still struggling to import at the moment in VS Code, which normally means my VS Code just needs a restart, but I'm not going to do that right now. I'll do that shortly, but I'll just get the date input brought in and make sure there's no errors. And we see an error on our value here because what we're trying to do here is our activity date has a type of string, and we're trying to set this to the value. And this isn't going to work now because we've specified our value is of type dates. And that means we need to change our activity model or our iActivity interface to use a date instead of a string. So let's open our activity.ts file. And inside here, we've currently got our date specified as a string, so we'll need to change this to date. And if we go across to our activity form, we can see that the error has now gone away. And we've got another error, and let's just take a look at this. And again, this is another one that's telling us that the type string is not assignable to type date. And if we take a look at this, this is our use state where we're setting our activity for our initial values of our form. We're initializing our date with a string here. And what we want to initialize this is with null. However, the property of type null is not assignable to type date. And that's because in our activity, our date is set as a required property. So what we need to do to get around this is to tell our activity interface that we're going to allow null as an option for our date field as well. Now, typically we would use a question mark to make a property optional, but if I go back and check this, we're still going to have an error inside our form initialization here, or inside our use state here, because type null is not assignable to type date or undefined. And what we do when we use the question mark in this particular case is we're telling our dates property that it can be either a date or it can be undefined. But because we're setting our date to null, what we'll do is we'll specify a union type, and we'll specify it can be either date or it can be null inside our iActivity interface. Now this is just a temporary solution at the moment. We'll do something better when it comes to initializing our form state shortly, but for now let's just move past the errors, and we've still got another error, and this time it's coming from our value, and that's because I need to specify this is also possibly undefined as well, and we're telling our compiler here we know what we're doing, because inside our value of this, it's going to be either set to the value or it's going to be null. And what we're doing here is just little temporary workarounds just to get our date picker working. And by the end of this section, we'll make sure we do this. I want to say the words properly, but at the moment we're just doing little hacky workarounds to get our date picker working so that we can see it in action. So this has removed all of the errors in our components, and we have our date input, that's error 3, and our value can either be the value or it can be null. Our activity form has the date inputs. So we've moved past all the errors, but this does not mean our application is going to be working, because this small change in our activity.ts file is going to break several parts of our application. And if we go and take a look, what we'll find is that anywhere we've used a date inside our application and we've used the iActivity interface, then we've effectively broken all of our dates inside our application. So we're not going to be able to see our date picker in action yet. We've still got some work to do to fix our application first of all, and then we'll be able to take a look and see our date picker in action. So what we'll look at next is we'll take a look at the errors we're getting here, and we'll take a look at resolving these, and then we should be able to make use of our date picker.